there. So if you've ever gone for a hike in the spring in a forest or wetland area, you've probably come across something like this. It's a random temporary pool of water that forms from melting snow or winter rain, and that doesn't stick around for very long. If I came back to this spot in midsummer, this will have easily dried up. I've walked past pools like this surely dozens of times in my life, and have given them essentially zero thought. But as it turns out, there is an entire hidden world in this pool, or hidden to me, at least. This is a vernal pool, and it is way more than just a temporary puddle. It's full of creatures that exist almost nowhere else, and it plays a big role in sustaining the forest around it. And after learning about these things from 3 experts, I cannot stop hyping them up. So, it's story time.
I first learned about vernal pools from a video posted by the Washtenaw County Parks and Rec Department in southeast Michigan. They posted a video of a creature I had never heard of before called a fairy shrimp. And the caption taught me that apparently fairy shrimp live in something called vernal pools, which I had also never heard of, or at minimum, never retained. Still, my curiosity was thoroughly piqued, and I immediately wanted to learn more about vernal pools in the Upper Peninsula, where I live. Mostly, I couldn't believe I'd been walking past what seemed to be entire ecosystems for years without noticing. And I wanted to learn more about not just what lives in vernal pools, but also why the pools are important. Pretty quickly, I realized that the most effective way to answer these questions wasn't going to be through Google. It felt important to me to actually visit one of these places and experience it in person. And when it came to learning about vernal pools, I was also really hoping to learn from an expert who could help me understand them. And to that end, I ended up getting connected with not 1, but 3 lovely humans from Michigan Technological University in the Western Upper Peninsula. Sam Kurkowski, who just finished her master's degree in applied ecology and did her thesis on vernal pools in the Great Lakes region, Dr. Chimner, an ecology professor who studies the wonderful world of wetlands, and Zoie Schafer, an ecology student and field tech who's also getting started on some vernal pools research of her own. These 3 generously agreed to take me out to visit some vernal pools. And one of my first questions for them as we got started was the obvious one. What exactly are vernal pools? What makes a vernal pool different from, like, your garden variety pond or, a puddle?
So this is a small pool in the forest, but is it a vernal pool? Does it meet the criteria of a vernal pool?
What are the criteria of a vernal pool?
So some of the most important ones are that they're isolated and fishless, are kind of the first criteria. The fishless part is really important because it lets other wildlife that can't survive with other predators thrive in vernal pools. That's kind of the different from a pond or a larger body of water.
And usually they have some indicator species of animals that live in them, like fairy shrimp, certain amphibians and frogs, and fingernail clams. So pond in your driveway may hold water, but it won't be a vernal pool because it won't have any of those indicator species. And this probably doesn't have any indicator species in it either.
This one probably dries out too quickly to have indicators. So it's more like weeks or months of having water, maybe 6 weeks or something in the spring instead of like days.
Okay, so this is just a puddle.
Yeah, we would call this a pool.
Okay.
More than
wetlands.
likely, yeah. It can be hard to tell.
So do vernal pools form in any climate that has snow that melts, or are there other criteria?
There are probably vernal pools everywhere that you can have a small depression in the landscape with enough water to fill it. So there are vernal pools in California that look really different than the ones that are here. So there's kind of a separate body of work about them. They're probably all over the world realistically, but they might not be the same as what we consider a vernal pool.
Okay, gotcha.
And our vernal pools are snowmelt fed, but a lot of regions is just winter rain can fill them.
Oh yeah.
Or winter precipitation.
That sounds so silly. I'm like, oh yeah, it can rain in the winter.
Yeah. Not every place gets 10 feet of snow.
Right.
When it comes to finding vernal pools, that can be done by people on the ground, but the world is a big place, and these pools don't stick around for terribly long, just a few weeks or so, like Sam said. So researchers also rely on equipment that can help them find vernal pools remotely. And while I was chatting with Zoie about that video I saw that kicked off my curiosity about this whole thing, Rod mentioned something that reminded me that the world is an eerily small place sometimes, because as it turns out, their remote sensing data comes from Ann Arbor, near where that fairy shrimp video was taken.
So our partners on this project are from Ann Arbor. They're at
Oh,
Michigan
amazing.
Tech Research Institute. So they do all the remote sensing and they find these vernal pools remotely.
They use like a combination of techniques. So LiDAR, which is like they can scan it like from a plane or satellites. You can see the topography and also the canopy and stuff. So LiDAR, radar, and aerial imagery, like some combination of those.
So they find little tiny depressions in the ground with LiDAR, and then they can see if it has water in it with radar.
Oh.
And compare spring and summer so they can see which ones don't have or have water in the
Dry
spring
up.
but not in the summer.
And then they can try to find to see if there's streams coming into it, because vernal pools are supposed to be isolated, with no hydrologic connection to anything else.
Are we gonna hop this one?
No,
Or-
this is the one.
Oh, okay. I couldn't remember.
Here, go find some fairy shrimp.
All right, welcome to a vernal pool. To recap, vernal pools are temporary pools that form in the spring and stick around for roughly a few weeks to a couple months, depending on the conditions. They're isolated and aren't fed by streams, and they don't contain fish. Instead, they usually contain at least one indicator species that let you know you've probably found a vernal pool. And this was my first introduction to one of those creatures. Animals living in my backyard, and probably yours, I have never known about.
So these are fairy shrimp.
Okay.
This is one of the.
Oh my gosh!
Oh,
Hello!
I lost it. There we go. So these are one of the 5 indicator species that we use for this region. And that means that these organisms rely on vernal pools almost exclusively. So you can't find them in more permanent water bodies because they don't compete well enough. The predators just eat them up.
And question, how do they get into a vernal pool?
Yeah, the way they survive in a vernal pool, which is part of it, is they lay their eggs and their eggs can completely dry up or like desiccate.
Oh, cool.
And then when the water fills up again, they can like rehydrate basically and just hatch and keep on going. And then they reproduce and lay eggs and then they dry out. They are transported indirectly. Obviously, they can't move themselves. So birds sometimes, like the eggs move on birds or other amphibians like salamanders, go between different pools.
So I know they're called fairy shrimp. Are there any relation to what I'll call actual shrimp?
No.
No.
Okay, I didn't imagine so.
These,
but
you ever heard of sea monkeys?
Oh yeah.
These are sea monkeys.
Wait, actually?
That's what they sold. Because these things, the eggs dry up, you can put them in a package. It was a different species of these.
Okay.
They're larger, but it's fairy shrimp.
So you've got fairy shrimp. What other plants or animals are you likely to find in a pond here?
In a vernal pool, we get a lot of wood frogs and a couple species of salamanders.
Other species use vernal pools. I've heard spring peepers at some before. Birds and mammals have been documented using them, but they don't use them quite as like exclusively as indicator species would.
Okay.
So
And when you say using them, like what for?
probably water and like food.
A lot of birds will come and eat the frogs.
Yeah.
Or salamanders or tadpoles.
Eating the eggs. There aren't any vegetation like obligate species,
Okay.
at least here. There are in other places in their vernal pools, but here you'll just find like more common of species that can also occur other places.
So with something that is so temporary, I guess, I can't think of any other way to ask this question other than like, so why do vernal pools matter? Like you've all clearly spent a ton of time studying them. Why?
Yeah.
On a forest, there can be any one vernal pool. Maybe it's not that important, but when there's thousands of them, they store a lot of water on the landscape, and then that slowly gets released into the groundwater and into the streams and rivers. They produce a lot of our amphibian species, and those amphibians they've been found to move nutrients out of these vernal pools. These are little hot spots of nutrients, and they'll move them into the forest as the frogs or amphibians hatch in here and eat all the nutrients in the pool. They'll go out in the forest, and then eventually they'll die or be eaten, and all those nutrients are then transferred into the forest. And there's been some really neat studies that have shown us a significant amount of nitrogen and phosphorus is moved into the upland forest.
Wow.
From these little pools.
Cool. and not an ecologist here,
Yeah.
what roles do like nitrogen and phosphorus play in a forest in this kind of ecosystem?
They're the primary limiting nutrients for plant growth.
Okay.
So that's what the trees are limited by, and their plants is all nitrogen and phosphorus.
Huh.
So you're just fertilizing, they're basically fertilizing the forest. Yeah, I mean, and also from the water standpoint, we're right next to a river, and we just had flooding from snowmelt, but it would have been a much worse flooding, a lot worse. So we didn't have wetlands and vernal pools capturing a lot of this water, storing it here instead of just running right into the river.
Okay.
So they're really important for hydrologic in a watershed condition.
Going back to it being good frog and salamander habitat, the fact that it's fishless is huge because there's a lot of aquatic habitat that they need to lay their eggs, but this is one of the few where it's going to be fishless, and so the offspring is safe.
Okay, so in your normal like neighborhood pond, there would be fish just eating everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if there's
Eating
fish,
eggs
there's
and-
probably not frogs. Or there could be, but they're not going to do well.
And some amphibians do well with fish, and they grow in wetlands and lakes and bigger bodies of water, and these ones do not. They can't tolerate fish.
To add to that, and really to paraphrase something that Sam and Rod said a bit later, vernal pools are also huge for biodiversity. Just having different kinds of habitat in a forest allows for different kinds of organisms to live there. To give one specific example, Rod mentioned that yellow birch trees have been found to be more abundant near vernal pools, which is cool because yellow birches aren't as common as they used to be. Overall, biodiversity is really beneficial because having more kinds of organisms means a forest is more resilient to things like pests and climate change. It's more likely that at least some of those species will be able to survive whatever comes their way. Also, vernal pools in particular have two distinct seasons. In the early spring, they provide aquatic habitats, and in the summer, when they dry out, they provide a different sort of habitat for a wide range of plants. So, in summary, they do so much more than I would have ever guessed. And this is not the last time that theme will come up. After this, we headed over to a second vernal pool, and I got to chat with Zoie about what it looks like to be a field tech. More on that in a second. But for now, what I really enjoyed about this second vernal pool, especially now that I understood why they're such a big deal, is just how different it was. I didn't realize how much diversity there could be even among pools maybe a few 100 feet apart.
What's interesting about these two pools that we've come to is that one over there dries out really quickly, has water in it for a month or less, but it's not long enough for frog species or amphibians, so there's no eggs, but there's a lot of fairy shrimp. Where this one stays wet longer, there's no fairy shrimp, but there's thousands of frogs here. And it's so loud that if you're sitting up on that hill, when it's probably another week from now, it actually hurts your ears. It's just so loud.
What?
Yeah, it's deafening, amongst other ones. Did you find some?
Got some fingernail clams.
Yay.
I've never heard of a fingernail clam.
So these look like little tiny clams. They're called fingernail clams. And they're another indicator of vernal pools. So we have two indicators in this spot, fingernail clams and wood frogs that are vernal pool indicators. So indicator species of vernal pools means that they indicate that there's likely to be a vernal pool. So we use five. We use five indicator species, 2 salamanders, a frog, fingernail clam, and fairy shrimp. But that doesn't mean that that's all that's in those pools. They just indicate that they're vernal pools. There's a lot of species and life in vernal pools.
So I know we covered this with fairy shrimp already, that fairy shrimp are only found in vernal pools?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, does that also apply to the 4 other indicator species?
They're like probably like 95% all like only in vernal pools.
Okay.
So I mean nothing is like perfect in ecology, but mostly there if you see them you can know that that place dries up.
Oh, that's a wood frog. The chuckling duck. So that's an indicator. Yeah, you sure? I'm gonna go for more salamander.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see any, but I mean I just like went through the middle. We could do the edges more.
Spoiler, we did not find any eggs. It was too early in the season. But I did get to learn about the research Sam just finished for her master's thesis, which I found super interesting. It was another moment of realizing that there is always more to vernal pools than meets the eye, which I found inspiring.
We wanted to get a better idea of what vernal pools look like here, because there's a lot of information about vernal pools in other places, but there's just less here. So We learned that they're similar to pools in the Northeast. Obviously, we both have the hardwoods and similar-ish soils. We also found that indicator species were more common in deciduous pools instead of conifer pools, probably because they get more light in the spring. Also, that their leaf litter is more like nutritious, essentially.
Oh.
Yeah, they have more available nutrients than like conifer needles that have other compounds that make them harder to break down. Yeah, and since that's kind of one of the food sources of larvae of frogs and salamanders, having more nutrients available might be better.
Okay, so this would be an
This would be a
example of
deciduous pool. They're all deciduous trees over it.
I would have never thought about that. Like how the
We didn't either.
yeah.
We just knew that when we went to vernal pools, some of them had a lot of indicators and some didn't, even though they looked really maybe similar. So we wanted to know why they were different. There's a lot more to learn, for sure.
Nice.
See what I mean? There's just so much to consider, and it just kept going from there as I chatted with Zoe about what she's done as a field tech and some of her research.
Basically, whatever Sam is interested in sampling or whoever your crew lead is interested in sampling, you help with all of that. So for vernal pools, that meant backpacking across Isle Royale with these guys and taking pH, measuring the length and width of the pool, whatever they needed. So you get to do a wide variety of things, and it's a really good experience.
So Zoe, you were talking about studying connectivity. To me, so if vernal pools are isolated and you connect two vernal pools together, it just sounds like you've just made a big vernal pool.
Oh, okay. I should clarify.
Yes.
I should clarify. So what I meant by connectivity was, if you're looking at a series of vernal pools, I meant connective, like in a sense that they're close together distance-wise,
Okay, got
not
it.
like the water is connected.
So like, are they close enough that the animals in each one can get between pools? And then are there
Cool.
like barriers? Maybe a road or a cliff or like a clear cut or something would be a barrier that would make them not connected, even
Got
if
it.
they're close.
Okay.
So we'll be looking into that at Pictured Rocks this spring and like going into the summer, which is obviously an unmanaged system, but that could be really useful in a managed system where there's logging to say, okay, obviously habitat fragmentation is a huge issue, but if you're gonna cut off this pool, what effect could that have?
Oh, neat. Okay. So you could be, I guess, just like applications of research. You could be like, hi, Ford Center, who's managing that forest. You can log this section, but like, if you log this section, you're going to disrupt this whole vernal pool system.
It depends like who the stakeholders are and what their goals are. But if you wanted to make conservation like part of it, then you'd be like, oh, this is something I need to think about.
So I guess thinking about that, whenever I, think about ecology stuff like this, climate change,
Yeah.
question mark. How will that affect vernal pools? Or is it already?
all depends on the precipitation. If we get
Yeah.
wetter winters, it probably won't affect them much because they form from snow or rain in the winter and they don't have to stay wet very long. But if we get drier winters and really dry springs, it'll have a huge impact. So
Yeah.
for instance, in 2010, we did a study in Pictured Rocks on vernal pools, and that was the hottest, driest spring I think we've ever had. 90% of the vernal pools we visited were dried out they were desiccating salamander and frog egg masses. So
Oh my gosh.
it was just very not ideal situation for vernal pools. So
Yeah.
if those conditions happen more and more, our amphibian population would be in trouble. But if it's like this year, where we had a lot of precip, which
Yeah.
is also being predicted for climate change, then the vernal pools and amphibians will fare much better.
Okay.
So it depends.
What is a vernal pool really changes on a year-to-year basis based on how much water you have. So maybe something that's almost a pond in the wet years, it clearly doesn't dry. In those dry years, that's really important, like vernal pool essentially. So protecting like a wide range of vernal pool characteristics is important to kind of account for all of that, because even without climate change, there's just a lot of variation from year to year.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
And that variation is going to get greater and greater.
Okay.
We've already seen that.
Yeah.
yeah. Like small and maybe nondescript doesn't mean it's not important,
Yeah.
So there might be stuff you can't see, like tiny fairy shrimp, or ecosystem services is a word people use. So like protecting water availability in the forest and or
Okay.
improving that and other stuff like that. You might not think that this little like pool of water does that, but it is doing that, so.
Yeah, I feel like that's something I keep realizing over the course of this conversation is like, I'm sure I've walked past vernal pools
Oh yeah.
a million times, and I've always just gone, oh yeah, snow's melting.
Yeah, you gotta look closely. It's
Yeah.
hard to see, so.
One thing I'd want people to realize is that even though vernal pools are small and they dry up, there actually are really important ecosystems and they're worthy of protection.
I'm restraining laughter because Sam said
That's
the
what I
exact
said
same
when we were
thing.
walking up the
It's
hill.
like,
No,
it
it's
is.
really important.
They are.
And yeah, people don't
Even
think about
scientists, everyone, you don't really think about things because they're small and they're common or they're just puddles of water, but they're not. They're actually an important ecosystem.
I feel like from the wildlife standpoint, they're often overlooked because they're such important habitat for frogs, but they're not necessarily a very charismatic taxa. It's not like a larger mammal where you would think of protecting like all this terrestrial habitat. With a frog, a lot of people, it's just like, it's just a frog, like it's slimy and gross, but not to me. I love frogs.
And the difficult part is large wetlands are protected by the Clean Water Act in Michigan,
Oh, okay.
but
That's
vernal pools are too small. They're not protected by any federal laws.
Interesting.
Some states have regulations on vernal pools, but not all of them, and they change from state to state, so it can be really difficult.
And like Forest Service can protect them or Park Service, but they're not mandated to. We should go walk down to
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
the
do it.
little wetland.
I learned so much from this conversation with Sam, Zoie, and Rod, and I'm really grateful for not only their expertise, but their willingness to share it. I don't think it would have sunk in just how important vernal pools are or how much they do if I had just read a few web pages or even a book or two. So if you have the opportunity, I highly recommend visiting a vernal pool this spring, or next spring if your corner of the world has already dried out. If you do, please tread lightly, be very mindful of where you step, and leave no trace you were there. Same goes for any kids or pets you might be bringing with you. And if you'd like to learn more about studying vernal pools as a citizen scientist, which sounds super fun, you can check out the Michigan Vernal Pools Partnership, link in the description. Overall, I am just in awe at how many incredible things exist in the world around us, in the most seemingly ordinary places. And I know I will never look at a random pool in the forest the same way again. Like most of my videos right now, this one isn't sponsored, so I wanted to say a special thank you to the folks who support my work on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. I've said things like this before, but your support allows me to make projects like this without worrying how I'm going to pay for things like editing software, microphones for experts, labor, or honestly, even just gas to go drive out and visit vernal pools. So you're awesome and very generous. Thank you so much for helping me make stuff like this. If you'd like more information about supporting this series, you can go to patreon.com/Alexis Dahl or click the link in the video description. Also, if support is not for you, no worries. So grateful you're here. Thanks for watching. Again, thanks for being here. I hope you learned something that makes you think about the world just a little differently, and I'll see you soon.